Hey guys, I am Pixel Dan, and this is a review of the Masters of the Universe Revelation Skelegod, part of the new Masterverse toy line. So we've talked about this a little bit already in the Battle Cat review, but Masterverse is the brand new 7-inch scale Masters of the Universe toy line that is beginning to hit retail shelves, and it sounds like this line is going to be a mixture of various Masters of the Universe items from different media, but it's definitely starting off with characters from the upcoming Netflix Revelation animated series. And this is one of the deluxe figures in the line, so you can see it's a pretty large box housing a pretty large action figure in the form of Skelegod. Who is Skelegod? We actually have no idea yet. I think it's pretty easy to figure out exactly what's going on here, and it's probably a little bit of a spoiler, but he's been out there, he's been with a lot of the press releases about the new show and the new toy line. So I apologize for anybody that's trying to skip spoilers, but this is kind of a spoilerific figure, and it is hitting stores about a month before the series debuts on Netflix. But you can see this is the new Masterverse packaging. It's a window box. It's got a blue and black color scheme with like some, it looks almost like hieroglyphics or definitely some sort of like symbols and everything up here in the top blue portion. You can actually see various Masters logos in here, like the Ram Skull from the Havoc staff is in here. You can see a Horde logo in here. Really interesting stuff. As we rotate the figure around to the side, you can see some beautiful artwork by the awesome Eamon O'Donoghue, and that continues on the back where there's some different artwork of Skelegod, as well as a description that sort of phrases it like a what if. I assume this is something that we'll see in the series, but it's basically talking about how He-Man has always been able to thwart Skeletor, but what if Skeletor were successful? So essentially, this is exactly what we've guessed. This is what Skeletor would look like with the power of Grayskull, I guess. Or one version of it. We've seen that before, right? In the 1987 live-action movie with Golden God Skeletor, but that's basically what we got. It's like an animated version of that, so I'm kind of excited to see this figure outside of the box here. But you can see there is a cross-sell as well, showing all the other figures being released in this first wave. So, let's go ahead and get Skelegod here pulled outside of this box, and we'll get a closer look at the figure. All right, we've got Skelegod outside of his box. So since he's a deluxe figure, he is a bit taller. I believe he's going to stand taller than some of the other figures in this particular line. You can see he's about 7.5 inches tall. He's pushing closer to 8. He is a big, hefty looking action figure. So really cool. I actually really like the size on that. And while we're talking about the size, why don't we do a little bit of comparison right out the gate? If you want to bring in here the Masters of the Universe Origins Skeletor, which is the other current retail line from Mattel, you can see the massive size difference between these. And it's not even just the height, like the proportions are totally different on the Masterverse figures. Of course, these are trying to mimic the animated style of Revelation, but it's really interesting looking at these side by side. These are 5.5 inches, so this is 7.5 pushing closer to 8 inches tall. The other thing I do want to bring in, I'm actually going to bring in He-Man right now. We'll look at some Skeletors in a bit, don't worry. But this is the Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man action figure, specifically for scale. The reason I'm doing this is because I think a lot of people were hoping that Masterverse was sort of going to be the spiritual successor to the Masters of the Universe Classics line, which was a 7-inch scale line. You can see this guy stands almost directly at 7 inches tall. Now, with Skelegod being a character that's supposed to be bigger, this actually does look pretty cool. I mean, that is a big, monstrous, hulked up Skeletor right there. So if you wanted to display these alongside your Masters Classics figures, that might actually work out pretty well. So it'll be interesting to see the mainline figures alongside Classics. I have seen some rumblings that they're a bit taller than these, but we'll see once we get a hold of He-Man. We'll compare them side by side. So with the scale out of the way, let's go ahead and focus on what makes these guys so different. I do want to go ahead and jump into the articulation here, because Mattel's doing some new things with this that they didn't even do with Masters Classics. So, we do have a ball joint at the head there. This is a removable head, just like we've seen for a lot of the other figures from Mattel. We'll get back to that here in a bit, but you can see the ball joint up there does have a little bit of forward and backwards movement. Of course, you can rotate that head all the way around there. These shoulder pads are made of a pliable plastic as to try to not get in the way of the shoulder joints too much, but you can see they are it looks like probably the ball and socket joints there. Then go forwards, backwards. We got swivels at the elbow. And then here's something new, double jointed elbows. Look at that. Double joints at the elbows. So we can rotate those all the way back. You'll notice I just popped the gauntlet off. That's one of the next things I was going to show you. So the wrists, very much like with Origins, the wrists are just on pegs. So you can swivel the hands, and then you've also got the hinge joint there. But they are removable as well because we've got some interchangeable hands. That little gauntlet thing right there is just a loose accessory piece plugged into the forearm. And it is really loose. Like, it really kind of just flops around, and I don't like that. And you saw how I just easily popped that off a second ago, but there's a pretty good range of motion right there. You can see where I've got the double joint bent right there, so that works out pretty good. So at the torso here, we do have a nice ball joint up there in the midsection, so you can see it rolls all the way around. We can also swivel, it looks like, at the waist. I think that's just a swivel cut there. Then we've got the hinge-like joints at the thighs, the ball hinges there, so legs can go outwards, forwards, backwards, swivels at the thigh cut. Again, double joints at the knees, and there's no pins showing. That's another thing. These are the pinless joints, so there's no pins in the elbows or the knees. You can see the top of the joint actually is a lot tougher to bend than the bottom portion of the joint, and we've got a swivel at the boot cut, which is very loose. Unfortunately, like, look at that. You can see how loose that swivel is there, and that also brings us down to the ankles, where you can see the hinges go forwards and backwards. We do have rockers going side to side, but the ankles are also pretty loose on this guy. I will say a lot of the joints on here feel looser than they should, but it feels the most loose down there with the boot cuts and the ankles. And while I can get him standing pretty good, there's definitely moments like that where if you don't have the ankles just right, he'll be a little top heavy and he will fall forward. So for those of you hoping these were the spiritual successor to Masters of the Universe Classics, well, they are. They have loose ankles just like those. But for real, I hope that's something that Mattel can tighten up, because this is a new ground for Masters of the Universe, having all of this, I guess what a lot of people refer to as modern articulation, with the double joints at the elbows and the knees and the pinless joints. So for those of you out there who like the superposability in your figures, it looks like this line is going to be the most posable Masters of the Universe line so far. So they just need to tighten up some of those joints, and it should be pretty good. Otherwise, the figure feels pretty good. Like I said, I don't like how loose and soft these gauntlets feel, because they're also very pliable, and they just I don't know, that looks way too loose. I don't think it should be spinning that much. And some of the plastics on here do feel very, very soft, but for the most part, I think this feels solid. He's not wobbly or anything like that. So hopefully this is a sign of things to come. Maybe they can tweak it, improve it, tighten these joints up, and I think it would be perfect otherwise. So some other fun things going on with this guy. First of all, the design is pretty neat. So this is like a Skeletor with the power, I guess, the power of Grayskull. One of the things I thought was really interesting is his neck is a translucent plastic, so it almost looks like it's glowing on like this magic, like his skull is just floating off of his body with this green magic. I thought that was really cool. His shoulder pads almost look like rhino beetles to me. They got these glowing green eyes. You can see he's got ram horns on his helmet there. That is very reminiscent of the Havoc staff, of course. You'll notice there's almost like this scar-like thing that's sculpted on his chest that's like green and pink. It is sort of in the shape of the He-Man H that is on He-Man's armor and his battle armor and stuff like that. So that's really interesting. And it also feels like these skulls on the boots have a very Hordak-like look to them. So really interesting stuff there. Rotating around to the back side, you can see this really interesting cape. So they went with a cloth cape, and it's just kind of a felt material, but you can see how it's like a 3-layer cape, and I thought that was really, really interesting. So we've got like this top little flap here, we got kind of like these 2 long ribbons, which actually have these pieces of plastic embedded on them. That's like kind of an adornment, and it makes it heavy, so it hangs. I actually really like that. And then you can see they even did like this 2-color purple on the tattered capes. So I don't always love cloth capes, and this does still feel a little, like crafty, like just made of like a fabric felt you would find at a craft store, but at least with the extra layers, it makes it look a little bit better. It's also really interesting to see how this is attached. So if you take it off, you see it was really easy to pull off. You'll notice he's still wearing armor of sorts. It's actually what's wrapped around on the shoulder armor there, but it's very much in the style of vintage Masters of the Universe figures where you just have the straps there. So we should be able just to remove all of this. And then the cape, it looks like magnets, but that's not magnets. Now, those are little pieces of metal. They're like these little metal studs. But then you can see there's just these little hooks there, and those hooks just kind of like rest on top of the armor, and that's what holds it on. So I don't know if those little pieces of metal are just like spacers so that it's flush up against the armor or what. It works fine. I'm actually kind of surprised by how well that works since it's just clipping onto the top of the armor. But it's a really interesting cape design, and it's easy to remove. You just kind of lift it and you pull it right off there. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to do was pull this off to see what it looks like. It's actually very tough because it's so tight, and they definitely kind of painted over it, I think. It was almost like kind of stuck. But you can take those off like regular armor pieces. However, I don't know if it's meant to actually come off the figure. You can see it's attached by pegs, and those seem to be glued in. In fact, I think I'm breaking the plastic there. You can see the stress marks. So I'm not entirely sure that the shoulder armor is meant to come off, but it's really interesting how they still have the straps there, very similar to the vintage figures. I guess that maybe is just for aesthetics. So let's go and talk about that interchangeable head now. I definitely wanted to come back to that. I showed you guys that the head is on a ball joint and it pops right off. Very similar to what we've seen with the Masters Origins toy line. The head sculpt I really like. It's got a very cool bony look to it. Kind of wish it was a little more yellow. I like it when Skeletor's skull is more yellow than bone colored, but it's still a really nice design. I think it's a great sculpt there. Has a nice paint deco, a nice wash and everything. It's pliable. It's a lot more soft than what we typically see on figureheads. And I do want to go ahead and bring in a Masters of the Universe Origins Skeletor, and I'm going to pop off his head because I do want to show you guys that the joint is the same size. So look at that. You can pop the origin heads onto the Skelegod body, and you can pop the Skelegod head onto the origins bodies. Now, the Skelegod head is much smaller. Funnily enough, it actually looks better proportioned for the origins bodies. So that looks kind of cool. Could make for some cool customs. The origins heads on the Skelegod body look comically large, though. I mean, it looks really, really goofy. But it's still cool that it's the same joint, so you can do some mixing and matching. You can swap some different Skeletor heads on there to see if you like any of them. Oh, here's something that I thought was really fun. The Scareglow head actually looks kind of cool on the Skelegod body. And even more than that, if you take the Skelegod head and put it on the Scareglow body with the purple Keldor cape, that's pretty rad. So here's the big question for everybody that wants these to fit in with their Masters Classics lines. Are the heads interchangeable with that toy line? So if we go ahead and pop Skeletor's head off here, we can take the Skelegod head, and it does fit on the body. And again, that actually looks really cool. I mean, it's a bit smaller than the heads for Classics as well, because those are actually about the same size as the heads for Origins. But the proportions actually look really good. I will say that, like Origins, it's not a perfect fit. It's a bit loose. Of course, since the head is also very soft and pliable, you can see it's very easy to pop on and off that ball joint, but it stays on, so that is something that you can do. However, we run into the same thing vice versa that we do between Classics and Origins. The Classics heads do not fit directly on this ball joint. Now, you could probably do some work to it. You could probably warm it up or something like that. But if we're talking just straight popping on and off the ball joint, it doesn't work. So unfortunately, the Classics heads do not seem to fit very well on the Masterverse bodies, but the Masterverse heads do sort of fit on the Classics bodies. Okay, so I haven't even spoken about his accessories yet. So I kind of mentioned that he does have interchangeable hands. Out of the box, he's got these really wicked, like, open hands. These very, very big hands. But you do have the ability to easily pop those out of socket. Again, this is where you can see how that little gauntlet on his hand is just removable. But you can swap on some hands that are gripping hands for his other accessories that are included. So let's go ahead and swap out both open hands for the gripping hands. They're just little pegs that plug in there. And there's a couple fun things we can do. Like, first of all, we've got this cool little energy blast thing, just like this translucent green, like supposed to look like a powered up fist, I guess. So that can fit over one of those closed fist hands. So that way you can pose Skeletor as if he's charging up an energy blast with one of his hands. And then, of course, the other thing that he comes with is He-Man's Sword of Power. So, again, I think the whole idea with Skelegod here is that he got a hold of He-Man's sword, or I guess this is the equivalent of the mini-comics of Skeletor getting both halves of the power sword, or, you know, anything like that. He's got the power of Grayskull now. So he actually gets a really tight grip on it, even though his hands look oversized. They're actually fitted for that power sword, so you can pose your Skelegod with the Sword of Power if you want to. And looking at the Sword of Power, since this is our first chance to look at it, it's actually a pretty nice looking accessory. It's definitely modeled after the style of the sword from the Filmation animated series and the old toy line, but you can see it does kind of have its own flair to it. It's not exact. The blade looks longer and skinnier. I love the two-tone paint job because the blade itself is painted metallic silver while the hilt is gray, and then it's got a brown wrap on there. So I love that they actually painted the sword. And for those of you that are curious, we can put this with our Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man in case you want to see what a different power sword looks like with that figure. In fact, here, I'll even do this. I'll put both of them side by side so you can see the difference in size between the two swords. All right, guys, it's comparison time. Now, you've already seen these guys a few times throughout the video, but let's get some proper shots. First of all, of Skelegod standing alongside the Masters of the Universe Origins Skeletor. These are the two retail toy lines right now from Mattel. Two different Masters of the Universe toy lines, both on shelves at the same time. That's pretty bonkers looking at these two side by side to see the differences. And we're going to go ahead and stand them alongside that Masters of the Universe Classic Skeletor, as well as the Filmation version of Skeletor from that line. So you can see them all standing side by side. You can really see the design differences and the scale differences between them. And one of the other things I wanted to do, just to show you some compatibility, is put him in here with the Masters of the Universe Classics Panther. I feel that works pretty well because the cats from that line were huge, so he looks pretty great standing alongside it, and he can sit on the saddle. He might look a little bit oversized, but it's not too bad. He can actually sit on that saddle pretty well. So there you go, my friends. That is a look at the brand new Masterverse Masters of the Universe Revelation Skelegod action figure. So there are definitely some things about this that I'm hoping Mattel tweaks. It's mostly with the articulation. Some of that stuff just feels a little too loose and a little too gummy for my liking, and I don't really like those loose ankle joints, but it's not as bad as I've seen. He still stands okay. You just got to make sure you get him in the right position. They're definitely on the right track, especially for those who enjoy the extra articulation, because they're doing some new things with the double jointed knees and the double jointed elbows and no pins. And while I was very unsure about the overall design of this guy, I got to be honest, this figure is a lot more fun than I expected it to be. So I'm curious to see how the character itself turns out, but at the end of the day, still a cool toy is still a cool toy, right? So these things are actually hitting Target stores right now. They've also been going in and out of stock on Target's website, so I will link to it in the video description so you guys can keep an eye on it for yourself. Thank you so very much for watching this video, And until next time.
The Toys of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is available for pre-order now. This official guidebook is published by Dark Horse Books and features over 750 pages of photos and information on your favorite He-Man and She-Ra action figures. And don't miss out on the exclusive bundle pack available for pre-order now from PowerCon. This bundle includes the official guide as well as an exclusive character guide supplement that you won't be able to buy anywhere else. Don't miss out. You have the power.